7. Dreams and the determination of time. Man seeks, by his rebellion against God, the freedom to be his own God. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. Man seeks, as against God's decree of predestination and God's time, to establish his own decree and plan, to make time his own realm and wealth. The melancholy consequence of all this appears in that notable humanist, Sigmund Freud. Freud is a spiritual child of Immanuel Kant. For him, after Kant, the real world is the inner world of man's mind, and time is inner time. But something more happens to time in Freud's thought. It recedes from the conscious mind of man to the unconscious, and to man's dreams. The concluding paragraph of Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams is most revealing. And what of the value of dreams in regard to our knowledge of the future? That, of course, is quite out of the question. One would like to substitute the words, in regard to our knowledge of the past, for in every sense a dream has its origin in the past. The ancient belief that dreams reveal the future is not indeed entirely devoid of truth. By representing a wish as fulfilled, the dream certainly leads us into the future. But this future, which the dreamer accepts as his present, has been shaped in the likeness of the past by the indestructible wish. This is an ironic conclusion for humanism. Having rejected the crucified Christ, humanism in Freud crucifies itself on its own past, a past going back to primordial man. What Freud tells us, first, with respect to man and time, is that they are both hopelessly past-bound. God's decree of predestination declares that God is the first and personal cause of all things, but it does clearly make man a secondary cause and person. In the humanistic, quote, freedom, end quote, of Freud, man has no such place. He is a prisoner of the past, and is caught as the helpless victim of two basic and Manichaean aspects of his being, the will to live and the will to death. There is no escape from that conflict. It is a metaphysical, not a moral conflict. Man, thus, has no freedom, and all time witnesses to his bondage to the past and to his own being. The past writes an iron decree of predestination in man, and there is no escape. Second, Freud's man has a future, but it is not God's plan, nor is it man's plan, but man's past repeated. The past, thus, is not only remembered in man's unconscious and in his dreams, but also repeated in man's future. Instead of being God, man is his own victim. In the biblical perspective, while man experiences time from past to present to future, because God's decree covers all of time, the future determines the past and present. The goal of history determines the course of history. Man, therefore, is motivated by his faith in that goal, and the knowledge of that faith that the goal has been predetermined and cannot fail. This makes man future-oriented, whereas Freud's man is past-oriented. Third, there is, in a very real sense, no future for Freudian man. Only the endless, repetitive development of the outworkings of the past. The past becomes more than prologue to the future. It is in this sense Freud holds that dreams, quote, predict, end quote, the future. It is understandable why the Marxists have rejected Freud. If Freud is right, every revolutionary regime will repeat the past, because it must, out of a metaphysical necessity. Revolutions are then futile and senseless, because they accomplish nothing. Time future is simply time past repeated. Because of this, Marxists have been active in denying the validity of the Freudian system. The Marxist critique of Freudianism begins with the environmentalist presupposition. Environment, rather than innate constitution, is viewed as the decisive factor in both mental health and mental illness. Neuroses are the products of conflicts in the environment, and, in particular, a contradictory society, that is, any non-Marxist society. Alter the environment, and you alter man. This means conditioning. On the personal scale, it means the kind of conditioning Pavlov accomplished with his salivating dogs. On the social scale, all society is reconditioned. Perhaps nothing in all my education was more often cited, repeated and commented on than Pavlov's experiments with dogs. In one university department of study after another, Pavlov was cited, usually with some measure of acceptance. Verbal commentaries were far less guarded than written ones. For humanistic intellectuals, it offered hope. They were all would-be Pavlovs, and the rest of us, the dogs. The world of B.F. Skinner is an appealing world to those who dream of playing God over other men. It is, however, the death of humanism, not its apotheosis. It says, in effect, that humanism's hope concerning man is futile, and, therefore, by turning most men into slaves, some kind of human order can be salvaged against the threat of total darkness. Its implication is that humanism sees the slavery of man to man as far better than man's freedom and dominion under God. The Marxists, thus, do not vindicate revolution. All their critiques of Freud accomplishes is to justify their particular persons as revolutionists. They sacrifice man to their own elite person, and the ancient doctrine of the divine right of kings is replaced by the even more arbitrary doctrine of the divine right of all revolutionists to be the Pavlovian or Skinnerian elite. The humanistic, quote, summing up, end quote, of the meaning of time becomes therefore a pathetic and empty thing. Thus, W. Somerset Maugham, in writing of his life, find little to say other than to vent his petty malice and to conclude, "There is no reason for life, and life has no meaning. We are here, inhabitants for a little while of a small planet, revolving round a minor star, which, in its turn, is a member of one of unnumbered galaxies. It may be that this planet alone can support life, or it may be that in other parts of the universe, other planets have had the possibility of forming a suitable environment to that substance from which, we suppose, along the vast course of time, the men we are have been gradually created. And if the astronomer tells us truth, this planet will eventually reach a condition when living things can no longer exist upon it, and, at long last, the universe will attain that final stage of equilibrium when nothing more can happen. Eons and eons before this, man will have disappeared. Is it possible to suppose that it will matter then that he ever existed? He will have been a chapter in the history of the universe, as pointless as a chapter in which is written the life stories of the strange monsters that inhabited the primeval earth. By dissolving time and the universe into nothingness, Maugham seeks to dilute his own sin into nothingness also. By chronicling the evils and weaknesses of better men than himself, Maugham seeks to trivialize judgment and to reduce good and evil to empty words. Time, Freud held, is a bad dream worked out into destiny. Time, for others, became only the prelude to death and nothingness. Biblical time looks ahead to the Jubilee freedom, and the Jubilee appears in miniature every seventh day and seventh year. The meaning of time in Scripture cannot be understood apart from the meaning of the Sabbath. Where the Sabbath has no meaning, time loses its meaning before long. If man is lord over time, man's nature will determine time. If man is the product of an evolutionary past, that past will determine man, and therefore time. Granted the evolutionary faith, Freud's conclusions are logical. The mind of man determines time, but man's mind is not his own product, but a product of his primitive past. If God created man, then it follows that man is determined by God, and time also. The meaning of time is then predetermined. Man either accepts or rejects that meaning, and his decision is moral, not intellectual. Time is thus a moral question.